Hi, it's Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au. One of my primary motivations with my broadcasts over Facebook with these live rants is to try and correct some of the media misinformation about events in the housing market. It's a big task because there's just so much of it. But I thought tonight I'll just give you an example of how sometimes it happens. Firstly, I'm going to refer to a headline that occurred in the Courier Mail newspaper in Brisbane and some other of the community newspapers that are part of the News Limited group, and how that went on to be repeated on a major television station, and how it was all based on misinformation from a research company. Basically, the headlines claiming that units and houses in Logan City were going for double-digit discounts. It was all utter rubbish, and yet it was repeated in major media as fact. So it all started with some information from a research company called Logic, which is the most published of the research houses, mainly because they're the ones who pump out the most press releases. That's the way it works, sadly, in media when it comes to coverage of the housing industry. The entity that pumps out the most press releases gets the most coverage, and nobody ever challenges their data, and so often their data is rubbish. And it certainly wasn't this case. The data claimed that in the many suburbs of Logan City, that's the local government area that encompasses the southern suburbs of the Brisbane metropolitan area heading down towards the Gold Coast. It claimed that many of the suburbs in Logan City had major discounting happening, 12%, 16%. In one case, they claimed 50%, which is ludicrous, but that's what they said. And what they mean by discounting is the difference between the original asking price that a house is listed for and what it eventually sells for. So if a house is listed at a certain price and eventually it sells for 10% less, that means a discount of 10% has been applied. What's normal, it happens, it's quite a normal thing in real estate, even in strong growth markets. A certain level of discounting takes place because most people selling a house set the asking price high to allow room for some negotiation, and buyers come in and usually offer less than the asking price, and there's some negotiation takes place, and they settle somewhere in the middle. So the original sale asking price is usually higher than the eventual sale price. That's normal. But what's been suggested is that when markets are down, the level of discounting is higher. It gets up into double digits, 10, 15% discounts on the original asking price. The problem is, this story was based on dodgy data, as it so often is. CoreLogic, in its rush to get things out into the media, doesn't check its own information with sufficient efficiency, and sometimes absolute rubbish is spat out by their computer and it gets into newspapers as fact when it isn't. Now, so often the cause of dodgy data, rubbery figures, particularly with median prices and how much median prices are rising and falling, is caused by areas that have very small sales samples. Our belief is that any area that has fewer than, say, 30 sales in a year has too few sales to produce reliable median price data. Therefore, if you've got an area where, let's say, there's only 15 sales in the year, the median price is going to be very, very elastic. It's going to be a rubbery figure, and so the increase or the decrease in that median price compared to last year is going to be an unreliable figure. And quite often, when you get areas with very small sales samples, you get reports saying that the median price has increased 45% in the last 12 months, and people are rushing to buy there because values are rising so high. And of course, values aren't rising to that degree at all. In fact, in some cases, they're not rising at all. It's just that there's so few sales in that area that the median price data is totally unreliable and shouldn't be published if the researchers were responsible. So that's what happened here with this story about double-digit discounting in Logan City. All the examples that were quoted in the newspaper article quoted areas where, well, frankly, there's very few houses at all. Logan City is an area with some very older established suburbs, and then it's got new development areas, and then it's got locations where haven't been developed yet. They're still basically rural areas, and there's very, very few houses. and therefore very few house sales in a particular year. Therefore, the median price data is unreliable, and certainly the figures here on discounting are unreliable. Now, all the instances, or pretty much all the instances that were listed in the Courier Mail article, based on CoreLogic figures, were places where there are actually very few houses. Locations such as Riverbend, Wolfdean, Bannockburn, Stockley. Now in Wolfdean, I checked two major big name sources on house sales. In Wolfdean, there's only been one residential sale in the last 12 months, and in the previous year, only two. Now, you cannot have a median price when there's only one sale. You can't have a median price when there's only two sales in a year. Somehow, they've come up not only with a median price for Wolfdean, but a level of discounting, claiming that there's discounting of 17% based on one sale. In Bannockburn, there's only been 16 sales in the last 12 months and only 12 sales the year before. In Stockley, again, one of those places where there are very few houses, only 7 sales have taken place in the last 12 months. Therefore, you know, the price data, the data on median prices, the data on discounting is absolutely unreliable and shouldn't be published. But the biggest furphy of all, this article claimed that discounting in the unit market in the suburb of Rochdale, well, Rochdale isn't even in Logan City, I don't think, but anyway, they included in the article and said that there was 50% discounting. Well, I checked a number of major sorters. There actually haven't been any unit sales in Rochdale. It's a housing market. It's dominated by houses. In the last year, there have been 0 unit sales. The year before, 0 unit sales the year before that. So 3 consecutive years, no apartment sales at all in Rochdale. Yet somehow they've come up with a figure saying apartments in Rochdale are being discounted 50%. Well, it's just complete nonsense. In fact, the journalists writing this, if they knew anything about real estate, they would look at that and say, this can't be right. I want to go back to them and check. But they didn't do that because journalists don't check things anymore. They just publish the data that's spat out of the research companies' computers as fact. Nothing gets checked, nothing gets challenged, and so nonsense like this turns up in the paper. So this entire article was complete nonsense. It was based on dodgy data spat out of a computer by a research company that doesn't check things sufficiently before sending out a press release to get yet more publicity. But to compound the problem, Channel 7 picked up this story and repeated it in their weekend sunrise program, which was the introduction to an interview with me, in fact, a very short and sharp interview with the weekend sunrise program, in which I explained to them that, you know, the headline was rubbish and that this level of discounting was simply not taking place at all. In fact, even in Sydney, I did some research before the interview and found that even in Sydney, where the market is undoubtedly declining, but not to the degree that media is suggesting, and I could find actually very, very few instances in Sydney where a high level of discounting was taking place. It's relatively muted at the moment. But certainly this story in the Courier Mail, repeated by Channel 7, just rubbish, absolute rubbish. And yet it will be accepted forevermore because it's recorded in media. It's part of the public record that double-digit discounting is taking place in the Logan City market, and it simply isn't. It's a very solid market with good demand, high level of affordability, plenty of investors buying there as well as home buyers, and yeah, but that's how it happens. Media just doesn't do its job properly. They totally trust the figures spat out by big name research companies, and they don't do their job properly either, and so it just compounds. And so bad data from the research company, bad journalism results in an incorrect headline in an article in a newspaper, and then it's repeated by a major television station in a national broadcast. And the great seething mass of media misinformation just got bigger. That's how it happens, sadly. That's it for now. Let's do it again soon. Terry Ryder signing off.